When I received my acceptance letter to my dream university, I couldn't believe my luck. Not only had I made it in, but I'd also secured a scholarship that covered most of my tuition. After years of late nights studying and working part-time, everything seemed to fall into place. The path ahead felt brighter than it ever had before. I was 18 at the time and had been diligently saving up a college fund from my job at the local diner. I wanted to be prepared for any unexpected expenses, just in case the scholarship didn't cover everything. My plan was simple: save, stay responsible, and give myself some financial stability through those 4 years. Back then, I didn't have a bank account of my own, so my mom, Lisa, offered to keep the money in her account. It made sense for convenience, and I trusted her implicitly. After all, it was my money I earned through long shifts and missed social outings. I assumed that when the time came for me to head to college, she'd simply transfer the funds back to me. Why wouldn't she? It was for my education. But things didn't turn out that way. A week after my acceptance letter arrived, my parents sat me down in the living room. My dad, Thomas, cleared his throat while my mom folded her hands on her lap. Their expressions were neutral, almost too casual for what they were about to say. "Lily," my dad began, "since you got that amazing scholarship, we thought you wouldn't need the money you saved up anymore." I blinked, not comprehending. "What do you mean?" "We're going to use it to help your sister Jessica," my mom said matter-of-factly, as if she were discussing the weather. Jessica, my older sister by 3 years, the constant storm cloud in our lives. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd worked hard for that money. It was supposed to be my safety net, my hard-earned cushion for the future. "Wait, you're taking my college fund and giving it to Jessica? Why?" My voice trembled with disbelief. "Jessica needs it more right now," my mom replied, her tone unwavering. "You've got a scholarship, sweetheart. You'll be fine." I stared at them, searching their faces for some sign that this was a joke. But their eyes were steady, their minds made up. For as long as I could remember, Jessica had been the family's trouble magnet. Where I followed the rules and worked for everything, she seemed to skate through life without ever facing real consequences. She was 21, but you'd never guess it by the way my parents coddled her. It was as though she was perpetually stuck in childhood, protected from anything resembling responsibility. Growing up, I was constantly reminded to stay focused, to be responsible, and to work hard. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed to live under a different set of rules. She messed up, and my parents cleaned up the fallout. No matter how glaring her mistakes, they wrapped her in excuses and justifications, shielding her from reality. I could still remember when Jessica was 14, and the school called my parents about her bullying younger girls. Teachers reported weeks of torment, yet when my mom heard about it, she refused to believe it. Jessica cried, her go-to defense mechanism, and my mom took her side, turning the blame onto the victims. My sister got away with a week-long suspension, nothing more. Things only got worse when Jessica hit 16. She was caught smoking and dealing weed at school, a far more serious offense. This time, there was undeniable proof. She got expelled, a stain my parents couldn't talk their way out of. But instead of letting Jessica face her punishment, my mom spun a tale about how they wanted to send her to a prestigious boarding school. It was pure damage control, a desperate effort to maintain the illusion of Jessica's innocence. They poured money they didn't have into that expensive boarding school. My parents struggled financially, but they were willing to stretch themselves thin to protect Jessica's reputation. And for what? She ran away from that school a few months later, leaving a dramatic letter about how she was in love with her boyfriend, Ryan, and couldn't bear to be apart from him. Even then, my parents gave in. They promised that if Jessica finished high school, they'd support her decision to marry Ryan. And they did. As soon as she turned 18, she married him. My parents paid their rent, covered their expenses, and made sure Jessica and Ryan never had to worry about bills. Meanwhile, I was expected to fend for myself. I took on extra shifts at work, studied hard, and followed the rules, all while watching Jessica get handed everything I had to earn. And now they were taking my money, my college fund, and handing it over to her. I felt my stomach churn with anger and resentment. Why does Jessica need my money? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My dad smiled, as though delivering happy news. Jessica's pregnant. We want to help her and Ryan get a place of their own so they can start their family. I stared at him, my jaw slack. Pregnant? Jessica was about to become a mother, and they thought she needed my hard-earned money to fund that? I couldn't even wrap my head around it. How was she going to care for a baby when she could barely take care of herself? She needs stability, my mom added, her eyes soft with excitement. We thought this would be the perfect way to give her and the baby a fresh start. I wanted to scream. How could they not see the unfairness of this? All my work, all my planning being tossed aside like it meant nothing. It was like I was invisible, just a background character in the story of Jessica's life. I took a shaky breath. This isn't fair. That's my money. I saved it for college. You can't just decide to give it away. But my words fell on deaf ears. My parents were resolute. Their excitement for Jessica's impending motherhood eclipsed any consideration for me. My dreams, my sacrifices, none of it mattered to them as much as Jessica's latest life event. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I realized that no matter how hard I worked or how much I achieved, I would always come second to Jessica. And I was tired of trying to earn their approval, tired of being overlooked. I stopped arguing. What was the point? I nodded, numbly accepting their decision, even as my heart broke. But deep down, I knew I was done. Done fighting for a place in their world. My escape was coming. College was just around the corner, and I clung to that hope with everything I had. The weeks leading up to my move to college felt like I was walking through a fog. My parents' decision had created an invisible wall between us. We still lived under the same roof, but it felt like we were strangers. I went about my days quietly, my focus narrowed to packing and preparing for my escape. Every box I packed was a symbol of freedom, a step closer to leaving this suffocating dynamic behind. While I prepared to leave, my parents were busy making plans of their own. I'd hear snippets of their conversations, talk about turning my bedroom into a nursery for Jessica's baby, arguments over paint colors and crib designs. They were so caught up in the excitement of becoming grandparents that it was like I'd already left. My presence didn't matter. My future didn't matter. All they saw was the grandchild on the way, and everything else faded into the background. One night, I overheard my mom on the phone with Jessica. She was gushing over how proud she was of her for embracing motherhood. The hypocrisy of it was almost laughable. Jessica's life was a series of mistakes swept under the rug, while my achievements barely warranted a nod. I clenched my fists, reminding myself that soon, none of this would matter. I'd be gone. The day I left for college, the house was oddly quiet. I expected some kind of farewell, maybe a hug or a few words of encouragement. Instead, my dad stayed glued to the TV, and my mom was in the kitchen fussing over something for Jessica. When I rolled my suitcase to the front door, my mom glanced up briefly. "Have a good trip, Lily," she said, her voice distracted, as if I were going to the grocery store instead of starting a new chapter of my life. "Thanks," I muttered, my heart a lead weight in my chest. My friend Ava picked me up in her old Toyota. She hopped out, giving me a wide smile and a hug that made me feel more seen than I had in years. "You ready to get out of here?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "More than you know," I replied, managing a smile of my own. As Ava drove away, I didn't look back. I couldn't. The thought of seeing my parents one last time, of seeing them so focused on Jessica's future while mine barely registered, was too much to bear. I let the road ahead fill my vision. The horizon holding the promise of a fresh start. College was everything I needed it to be. I threw myself into my studies, taking pride in every assignment, every grade. I worked part-time at a cafe near campus, making friends who didn't know me as Jessica's sister, but simply as Lily. For the first time, I felt like I was living my own life, free from comparisons and expectations. The weight of my parents' favoritism lifted, replaced by a sense of independence and self-worth. I didn't need their approval. I was building something on my own, and it felt incredible. The resentment that had simmered inside me for so long started to cool. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could move past it all. I barely heard from my parents those first 2 years. They called occasionally, usually when they needed something. A favor, advice on how to use some piece of technology, or news about Jessica's pregnancy. Never to ask how I was doing or if I needed anything. It stung at first, but eventually I stopped expecting more. I accepted that this was the shape of our relationship now. Distant, transactional, hollow. Jessica gave birth to a baby boy named Lucas. I met him once, shortly after he was born. My parents were over the moon, doting on Lucas like he was the greatest gift the world had ever received. Jessica barely acknowledged me during that visit. She was too busy soaking in the praise and attention. I stayed long enough to be polite, then left. A hollow ache in my chest. Life went on. College kept me busy, and I was thriving in a way I never had before. My world was full of lectures, coffee shop shifts, and late-night study sessions with friends who felt more like family than my own ever did. I was happy, or at least I was content. The wounds my parents left were still there, but they didn't throb as painfully. They were scars now, reminders of where I came from and how far I'd come. Then, one morning, everything changed. My phone buzzed incessantly, pulling me out of a deep sleep. Groaning, I reached for it, squinting at the screen. Mom. My stomach twisted into a knot. She never called unless something was wrong. I answered, my voice thick with sleep. Hello? Lily? My mom's voice was panicked, trembling. Has Jessica called you? I sat up, the dread spreading through me like cold water. No. Why? What's going on? My mom started to cry, her sobs choppy and broken. She's gone. She left Lucas here. She just left him on our doorstep. I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. What do you mean she left him? She left a note. Lily, my mom choked out. She said she can't do it anymore. She doesn't want to be a mother. She left him for you. A cold chill ran through me. For me? I felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. My dad's voice took over, stern and urgent. Lily, we need you to come home. Now. We need to find Jessica. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, the anger and confusion swirling together. After 2 years of silence, they were calling me back. Not because they cared about me, but because they needed me. Again. I can't, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I have exams. I can't just drop everything. Lily, this is serious, my dad snapped. Jessica's missing. We need you here. But I wasn't the same girl who'd silently accepted their unfairness. You didn't need me for 2 years. Why do you need me now? This isn't about the past, he said, his tone sharp. This is family. We need you. I swallowed hard, the bitterness rising in my throat. Family? I echoed. Where was that when you took my college fund? Where was that when I was struggling on my own? His silence was heavy, filled with unspoken truths. I'm sorry, Dad, I said softly. I can't come right now. I'll do what I can from here, but I have my own life to take care of. The call ended with my dad's frustrated sigh, but I felt a strange sense of calm. For once, I was standing my ground. I wasn't about to be pulled back into their chaos. Not again. The phone call left me sitting on the edge of my bed, my thoughts swirling like leaves caught in a storm. My sister had left her son, her baby, on my parents' doorstep and vanished. And now, they were calling me to pick up the pieces. Again, I closed my eyes, taking a slow breath. The pain, the anger, the exhaustion, they all clawed at me, but beneath it, a whisper of guilt stirred. Lucas was just an innocent child. He hadn't asked to be caught up in Jessica's chaos or my parents' mess. I thought of his tiny hands, his curious eyes, a baby abandoned by his own mother. No matter how much I wanted to stay away, his face was now etched into my mind. But could I really go back? Could I walk into the same house that had drained me of my worth and dignity just to be their fixer again? I shook my head. No, I couldn't let their crisis swallow me whole. Not this time. Over the next few days, my phone buzzed nonstop with calls and messages from my mom. Each one carried more desperation than the last. Her voice trembled, sometimes with anger, sometimes with pleading. But no matter how often she begged, my answer stayed the same. I couldn't drop everything to come home. I had responsibilities, A life that I'd fought to build. Instead, I promised to reach out to Jessica myself. Maybe I could get through to her, even if my parents couldn't. I tried calling her phone several times. Nothing. Each call went straight to voicemail. Her social media accounts were inactive, and none of her old friends had heard from her. It was as though Jessica had vanished into thin air. Every night, I lay awake, torn between my resolve and the gnawing worry for Lucas. Images of him standing alone on the porch haunted me. I didn't doubt my parents would take care of him. They had always been willing to do anything for Jessica's sake. But that thought only made me angrier. They had bent over backward for her entire life, and this was the result. A child left behind, and a sister who thought nothing of walking away. Then one evening, I received a text from my dad. "Lily, please come home. We can't do this alone." There was no anger in his message this time, just raw, quiet desperation. My eyes stung as I read those words. Despite everything, they were still my parents. And Lucas, for better or worse, was my nephew. I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I packed a small bag and caught the earliest bus home. The familiar landscape rolled past the window, every mile carrying me back toward the place I'd sworn to leave behind. My stomach churned with unease, but I focused on Lucas. I wasn't doing this for my parents, or even for Jessica. I was doing it for him, a child who deserved better than the mess he'd been born into. When I finally arrived, the house looked smaller than I remembered, almost shrunken under the weight of its secrets and tensions. I walked up the driveway, my footsteps hesitant. My dad opened the door before I could knock. His face looked older, lines of worry carved deep into his features. "Lily," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He pulled me into an awkward hug, his arms trembling. I stiffened for a moment, then let myself relax. This wasn't about forgiveness, but maybe it was about understanding. Or at least trying to. My mom was in the living room, holding Lucas in her lap. His round eyes met mine, and he smiled, a simple, innocent smile that cut through all the chaos. He reached out a chubby hand, and something inside me softened. "Hi, Lucas," I whispered, crouching down to his level. "It's nice to meet you." He giggled, and for a moment, the weight on my chest lifted. My mom wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "Thank you for coming, Lily. We didn't know what else to do." I stood up, keeping my eyes on Lucas. "I'm not here to clean up Jessica's mess," I said firmly. "I'm here for him. He doesn't deserve any of this." My parents nodded, shame flickering across their faces. For once, they had no excuses, no justifications. Just silence. We sat down together, the room filled with an uncomfortable quiet. My mom handed me the note Jessica had left. My hands shook as I unfolded it. My sister's familiar handwriting scrawled across the paper. "I can't do this anymore. I'm not cut out to be a mother. Lily, you were always the strong one. Please take care of him. He deserves better than me." The words punched me in the gut. Anger, sadness, and a bitter sense of inevitability washed over me. Jessica had always run from her responsibilities, but this was a new low. And yet, her plea for me to take care of Lucas wasn't entirely a surprise. Maybe in her twisted way, she thought she was doing the right thing. I folded the note carefully and set it aside. My parents watched me, their eyes filled with questions they didn't know how to ask. "What happens now?" my dad finally said. I took a deep breath. "We need to contact CPS. This is bigger than us." My mom's face crumpled. "No, Lily, we can handle this as a family. We don't need outsiders involved." "This isn't something we can handle alone," I said, my voice firm. "Jessica abandoned her child. You can't just sweep this under the rug. Lucas needs stability, and we need help figuring out what's best for him." My dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "We're scared they'll take him away." "I know," I said softly, "but we have to do what's right for Lucas, not what's easiest for us." For once, they didn't argue. Maybe they were too tired, or maybe they finally understood. Either way, I knew this was the right decision. That night, as I lay on the old bed in my childhood room, now filled with baby toys and blankets, I stared at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I wasn't sure how this would all turn out, but one thing was clear. I wasn't the scared, overlooked girl I used to be. I had a voice, a purpose, and a chance to make things right, not just for myself, but for Lucas too. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Lucas babbling softly in his crib. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long lines across the room that used to be mine. For a moment, it felt like I was 16 again, waking up to another day of homework and part-time shifts. But the baby's cooing grounded me in the present. This wasn't my life anymore. This was something else, something far heavier. I got up and peeked into the crib. Lucas's bright eyes lit up when he saw me, his tiny hands reaching for mine. I smiled, despite the weight pressing on my chest. "Good morning, little guy," I whispered. His innocence was a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around us. I lifted him out of the crib and held him close, his warmth reminding me that some things were still pure, still worth protecting. Downstairs, comma. I found my mom and dad in the kitchen, their faces drawn and pale. The exhaustion had aged them overnight. They looked up when I entered, Lucas perched on my hip. "I'm going to call CPS today," I said, my voice steady. My mom's eyes filled with tears. "Lily, are you sure that's the right thing to do? We can figure this out together." "We've been figuring things out for Jessica her whole life," I replied gently but firmly. "And look where it's gotten us. This isn't about her anymore, it's about Lucas." My dad sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. "What do we even tell them?" "The truth," I said. "We tell them everything. That Jessica abandoned him, that she and Ryan are missing, and that Lucas needs someone who can give him the stability he deserves." I saw the defeat in their eyes. It was the first time I'd ever seen them truly acknowledge that Jessica's choices had led them here, to a place where love and denial had finally collided with reality. After breakfast, I took Lucas out for a walk while I made the call. The air was crisp, the scent of fallen leaves mingling with the faint smell of wood smoke. Lucas giggled as I pushed his stroller down the familiar streets of my old neighborhood. These streets held memories, both good and bad, but for Lucas, they were just another adventure. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart pounding as I spoke to the social worker. Her voice was calm and professional, asking questions I answered as honestly as I could. When I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and dread. The wheels were in motion now. There was no turning back. When we got home, my parents were waiting in the living room, the tension hanging thick in the air. "I called CPS," I said, my voice low. "They're going to send someone to assess the situation." My mom covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. My dad nodded, his jaw tight. I could see the fear in their eyes, fear that they'd lose Lucas, fear of judgment, fear of facing the consequences of all the choices that led us here. "We just wanted to protect Jessica," my mom whispered through her tears. "We thought if we gave her everything, she'd be okay." I looked at her, my own heart aching. "I know you did," I said softly. "But sometimes protecting someone means letting them face the consequences. You never let her do that." My dad cleared his throat, his eyes glassy. "And now it's Lucas who's paying the price." We sat in silence, the weight of regret and realization sinking in. It was painful, but for the first time it felt like we were all seeing the truth. Not the polished version my parents had always clung to, but the raw, unfiltered reality. The social worker arrived the next day. Her name was Miss Thompson, and she had a kind, steady presence that instantly made me feel a little calmer. She spoke with my parents first, asking questions about Jessica, Ryan, and everything that had happened. My mom's hands trembled as she answered, her voice thin with guilt. My dad sat beside her, his eyes downcast. Then Miss Thompson turned to me. "Lily, you seem to be the most stable figure in Lucas's life right now. Have you considered taking custody of him?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at Lucas, who was sitting on the floor playing with a stuffed bear. He was so small, so unaware of the storm around him. "I've thought about it," I admitted. "But I'm in college. I want to be there for him, but I can't drop everything to raise him." Ms. Thompson nodded, her eyes understanding. "That's completely valid. Taking custody is a huge decision, and it's important to know your limits. We'll explore other options, maybe foster care or a temporary guardian until your parents decide what they can handle." My mom flinched at the mention of foster care. "Please," she begged, "don't take him away." Ms. Thompson's voice was gentle but firm. "We have to think about what's best for Lucas. If you can provide a stable environment, that's great. But if not, we need to find someone who can." I felt a lump in my throat. Lucas deserved stability, not a family teetering on the edge of collapse. My parents loved him, but love alone wasn't enough to erase years of bad decisions and denial. Ms. Thompson promised to stay in touch. And as she left, the house felt eerily quiet. Lucas toddled over to me, his eyes bright and trusting. I picked him up, holding him close, and whispered, "You're going to be okay, little guy. I promise." That night, my mom and dad finally broke down. The years of protecting Jessica, of enabling her, had finally caught up with them. They cried together in the kitchen, their whispered apologies to each other, and to Lucas hanging in the air like fragile threads. I stayed upstairs, giving them space. I wasn't ready to forgive them, but maybe, just maybe, I could start to understand them. In my old bedroom, I watched Lucas sleep peacefully in his crib. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let him grow up the way I did. He deserved more. And even if I couldn't be his mother, I could still be someone who loved him, someone who showed up for him. For the first time in a long while, the thought of staying connected to my family didn't feel like a burden. Maybe things could change. Maybe we could heal. Not for Jessica's sake, but for Lucas's, and for mine. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. We all moved carefully around each other, like people walking across thin ice, afraid of the next crack. My parents were quieter than I'd ever seen them. They seemed smaller now, worn down by the weight of everything they had ignored for so long. Lucas, though, was a beam of light in the middle of it all. His laughter, his innocence, they reminded me of what was at stake. I spent as much time as I could with him, trying to give him a sense of normalcy. We played with his toys, read picture books, and went for walks around the neighborhood. He clung to me more and more, his little hand reaching for mine whenever I was near. I didn't know how to explain the bond forming between us. I just knew it felt right, like he trusted me in a way that made my heart ache. But reality loomed over us. I still had my life back at college, my own future that I had worked so hard to build. The thought of leaving Lucas behind twisted my stomach, but I also knew I couldn't give up everything for him. I'd spent too long sacrificing my own dreams for my family's chaos. If I lost myself now, I wouldn't be any good to him, or to myself. One afternoon, while Lucas napped, I found my mom sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window. The light caught the lines on her face, and I saw just how much she had aged over the past few weeks. She turned when she heard me and gave a weak smile. "Lily, sit down," she said softly. I sat across from her, the silence stretching between us. "We've been talking, your father and I," she began, her voice shaky. "We know we can't expect you to take care of Lucas. It wouldn't be fair to you." I felt a mix of relief and sadness. "I love him, Mom, but I can't be his parent. I can't give up my future." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "We understand. We're going to do our best to take care of him. We'll work with CPS and make sure we get the help we need. We can't fix what we did with Jessica, but maybe we can do better for Lucas." For the first time, it felt like they were truly seeing things for what they were. No more denial, no more excuses, just the raw, painful truth. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step forward, a chance to break the cycle that had caused so much damage. "I'll still be here for him," I said quietly. "I want to be in his life, but I need to finish school. I need to take care of myself, too." My mom reached for my hand, her grip trembling. "We're proud of you, Lily. We've always been proud of you. We just didn't know how to show it." Her words cracked something open inside me. Years of anger, hurt, and resentment bubbled to the surface, but they didn't feel as sharp anymore. I squeezed her hand back, the gesture small but enough. Later that evening, I sat in my old room, watching Lucas sleep. His tiny chest rose and fell, and his fingers curled around the edge of his blanket. I leaned over and kissed his forehead, whispering, "I'll always be here for you, no matter what." The next morning, I packed my bag to return to college. My parents stood by the front door, Lucas perched in my dad's arms. This time, the goodbye felt different. It wasn't cold or distant. It was full of unspoken promises, fragile hope, and the understanding that we were all trying to heal in our own ways. "Call us when you get there," my dad said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will," I promised. I hugged Lucas one last time, his chubby arms wrapping around my neck. "Be good for Grandpa and Grandma, okay?" He giggled, oblivious to the weight of the moment, but that was okay. He didn't need to carry this burden, not like I had Dot. As I got into the car, I glanced back at the house. It was still the same place that had held so much pain, but now it also held a sliver of hope. Maybe we couldn't change the past, but we could try to build a better future. For Lucas, for me, and even for my parents, Dot. The drive back to college felt different this time. The road stretched ahead, full of possibilities. I wasn't running away anymore. I was moving forward, carrying the lessons of my past but not letting them define me. I knew there would be challenges ahead, but I also knew I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. My life was mine to build, and for the first time, I felt ready to do just that. Dot. As I pulled onto campus, I smiled, a sense of calm settling over me. I wasn't alone. I had my friends, my future, and even my family, flawed and broken but still trying. And somewhere in that house there was a little boy who knew I loved him. And that was enough.